Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome back. As always, I am the always lovable, often imitated Jay. So sit back and relax as I tell you what I've been reading this time. So I don't really like talking about politics, so it's kind of unavoidable to talk about the whole election. Been quite a shit show, huh, hasn't it? I still can't believe that. Hey, future Jay? Jay, you gotta listen. You gotta remember to splice in who actually won here, okay? I know this has been a gigantic fucking mess, but you gotta remember to actually just put in who won here, because if you don't, it's gonna be super embarrassing if you say the wrong person. Especially don't leave this part in, because that's gonna be even more embarrassing. That won it. Well, a good thing I haven't really been paying attention at all, like a normal, sane person should be. Anyways, let's get this over with. So issue 99 is pretty uneventful, so we'll just speed right through it here. We open up with the Joker on his way to Ace Chemicals to begin his super ultimate evil final scheme of his evil plan, as he rants and explains his whole motives behind the current scheme, explaining that his entire reason for doing any of this was because he wanted to show Batman that no matter how much he tries, no matter how hard he works to change it, Gotham will never change because it doesn't want to change, that the city's default nature is a lawless nightmare zone, and trying to fix that will simply make things worse, blah 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 blah, whatever. Joker gets to Ace and begins offing everybody he sees. We cut back to Batman, who's assembled the combined might of the Bat family and Harley, as Batman recaps everything that's been happening and all the dumb tie-in stories that I didn't read, and they prepare to take the fight against Joker to full force. After a quick interlude continuing Catwoman's plotline from last time, Batman arrives at Ace, where Harley was waiting for him, and makes it clear that she wants Joker dead whether it's Batman or her killing him, which Batman completely shuts down anyways, because of course he does. Batman enters the factory, and the issue ends as he's attacked by zombie Alfred and Joker, who's stolen his fancy shiny batsuit and holds him at gunpoint. This issue was just pretty overall, honestly. I think its big problem is that the story had reached the point where the climax should have been, if not this issue, just the previous one, so we needed an issue to go because of course they built it up to be issue 100, so this issue is just primarily padding. So it's just super dull because otherwise this issue was like 6 pages long without all the padding. Joker's monologue it's just kind of not interesting at all, and his argument overall is just pretty dumb. Sure, he's not wrong that Gotham is this perpetual cesspool of crime despite the existence of all these superheroes. The argument falls flat when you consider that it's primarily because of some psycho supervillain like him or anybody else really fanning the flames, and not just Gotham itself being a perpetual shithole. He's not wrong that it's a perpetual shithole, but it's not just like, it's not the city itself, it's because of people like him, so his argument kind of loses. I get it, like, it contributes certainly, but that's besides the point. Everything else is just kind of dull. The stuff with Catwoman has been dull. I don't really care about anything else that really happened. I liked the little bit with the Bat family. Everybody gets like at least one line that says something interesting, even though it's not interesting at all. There's a nice little bit where Dick has a reunion with Bruce and he gets his old Nightwing costume back. I thought that part was cute. I've always preferred the old costume rather than the new one. Granted, I always preferred the one with the tassels because I'm a horrible, tacky idiot, but that's besides the point. So other than that, there really wasn't anything in this issue. It was just kind of a filling space to get to the finale. Now for the grand finale, issue 100 picks up with Babs once again taking up the role as Oracle, going full media takeover and starting to plan the attack against the Joker's army of clown mooks, while Batman and the Joker themselves do battle in the chemical plant. Joker's his usual bantering self, cracking jokes about the overgrown state of the Bat family, and he suggests that he should be the new Batman and Batman should become the new Joker and stuff like that, as Batman just pummels Joker mercilessly, smashing his new fancy Batsuit into bits. The Bat family ends up taking the fight right to Punchline, who's not exactly taking things very well after finding out that not only has Catman has been involved in this plotline. I fucking wish. Catwoman has stole back all Batman's money, and that the Joker's grand scheme has been totally ruined at this point. The fight keeps going on from there as Joker reiterates his rant from the previous issue to Batman, ultimately getting the upper hand in the fight and nearly taking down Batman before a last-second save from Harley, who blasts out Joker's eye. And then things get really fucking dumb, because Harley, rather than just capping Joker in the head and being done with it, cuffs Joker to a pole and gives Batman an absolutely fucking asinine ultimatum, strapping a bomb to both herself and the Joker, and giving Batman time to only save one of them before she runs off like an idiot. This was legitimately infuriating because it is just completely nonsensical on all fronts and really only just serves to give Joker an easy out to escape any kind of consequences. Naturally, of course, I didn't actually expect they'd kill the Joker here. I'm not stupid, but that doesn't give them the right to do completely insipid cop-outs like this, since not only does it make the characters all look like idiots, it's just insulting to the audience. Also, it's kind of a rip-off of the ending to Under the Red Hood, but that's neither here nor there. I'll at least give them points in that they have Batman just ignore Joker and just leaves him to die as he chases after Harley, but it's hollow, it's ultimately pointless anyways, it's a token gesture, it doesn't matter. Afterwards, we jump ahead a week later with Harley in the hospital. Naturally, of course, Joker escaped at the last second, and Batman has a heart-to-heart with Harley as he contemplates what the Joker said to him about how the city doesn't want him, how he's going to have to live without Alfred after having to bury him again, what he's planning to do next, and all this really emotional stuff, and it's a fun little discussion. Of course, Harley's doped to shit on painkillers, so she's barely even aware of what Bruce is saying to her as the issue ends, setting up some new villain called Ghostmaker, whatever. Before we get to the final recap, the issue has two other segments, one where Batman finds Clown Hunter's house and we figure out what his whole deal is, learning that pretty much as I figured, he was just some crazy kid whose parents were killed by the Joker who decided to go out and beat the fuck out of some clowns after Batman let all this zany shit happen for as long as it did. He gets pissed off at Batman for not just finally offing the Joker for like the billionth time, and how none of this ends up mattering because all the goons basically just get away with everything that they did the whole time. Surprisingly though, Batman doesn't really fight back to what he's saying, ultimately just saying that he wants to get him some help and he won't force him to stop what he's doing, but if he has to, he will eventually have to do so. And the segment ends with Clown Hunter saying that he's not planning on stopping what he's doing anytime soon. I enjoy this bit, although none of it really surprises me at all. It gives me what I had been asking for to finally figure out what this kid's deal is. Although at this point I'm pretty sure nothing more will ever come out of him for at least a significant amount of time. I enjoy that he gets to take plenty of digs at Batman, and that he ultimately calls out Batman for all the dumb shit he's done, not only just in the story arc, but just kind of in general. He's got a lot of really funny lines throughout it. It's short, but it's definitely a high point of the issue there. The other segment features the Joker at a bar, talking to some random guy as he sees what's happened in the week or so he's been in hiding. And as we find out that Punchline ultimately got let go, and we see a video of her explaining how she's totally innocent, you guys. Seriously, I just fell for the Joker's weird propaganda. I'm totally sorry, guys. Ugh. Anyways, the story ends as Joker guesses the guy he was talking with as he explains what he's going to do next, dressing up the guy's corpse as him to use as a decoy so he can fuck off and go hide for a little while. The finale overall is just okay. I mean, up until the part with the absolutely stupid cop-out, I had been enjoying Batman and Joker's fight. It's got a very high energy pace to it. It's fun that Batman and Joker are going toe-to-toe for the majority of it. It's not super one-sided on either side for at least most of the fight. As well as stuff with the Bat family is enjoyable too. It's comparatively short though. I can't say I didn't anticipate the ending going this way. That doesn't mean I can't be annoyed that it went this way anyways. The two epilogue segments are okay. Like I said, I liked the part with Clown Hunter and I thought it was a little fun, but the one with Joker is just kind of stupid. Again, the art is absolutely gorgeous here, and it really is the highlight of the arc in my opinion. I think Jimenez put a lot of great effort into it and absolutely excelled in delivering top-notch visual design here. Overall, the arc itself, it was just fine. Again, honestly, had it not been built up as this super big deal, I probably would have just avoided it. I wouldn't say I felt like I wasted my time reading it. Overall, it just doesn't bring in enough new for me to solidly recommend it to somebody who isn't already reading this comic actively. I don't think it's an absolute failure, but I don't think it really is a nice jumping on point for anybody. Can't say it really sold me on Tinian as a writer either, but I don't think he's a bad writer. I wasn't really impressed with what he brought to the table for this story arc. I've read one or two of his other stories in the meantime since I started it. I think he's just kind of fine overall. Nothing really he's done so far has popped for me, but I don't think he's awful. I just He's just fine to me. Not really impressive. I'm definitely not going to be reading Batman further than this unless something really, really crazy happens that catches my attention, though. Well, all things must eventually come to an end, and Williamson's run on Flash is no exception. So we pick up where we left off last time, with Flash and Zoom racing into the Speed Force with the promise of their alleged final battle. Zoom taunts Flash and tells him that they should just stay running like this forever, or that otherwise he should just get over with it and kill him again. Flash realizes that he needs to do something different than what he's tried before, because otherwise they'll be like this forever. So he turns to Zoom and says, "Eobard, I forgive you." Which is so insanely out of left field that Zoom and the audience is taken completely by surprise by it. Zoom can't deal with the sheer insanity of it all and mindlessly rushes down Flash, which Flash takes advantage of by vibrating himself at just the right frequency to allow Zoom to pass through him, just at the same time he was channeling the full Speed Force into him, causing it to bond with Zoom and grounding him back into the timeline. It makes sense, don't worry. This causes Zoom, who had been walking, or running in this case, Paradox since Flashpoint happened, to vanish from the timeline, and we jump to the 25th century, where we see Flash watching Thawne, now not crazy, apparently, and working as a tour guide in the Flash Museum, seemingly unaware of anything that has happened before. Interestingly, it's shown that the Reverse Flash still exists, and it implies that Thawne seemingly will still eventually become him, but his identity is shown to be unknown to the people of the future, so it's kind of left up in the air. Barry runs off back and forth through time, setting things right, and we're told that as expected, fixing Zoom seems to have fucked the timeline even more, but otherwise the present's okay, and everything's gonna go fine, everything's back to normal. That's what's important. Oh yeah, and Godspeed's alive again too, there's that. After a quick interlude with Barry stopping to see a woman who he assumed was killed by Thawne, finding her now alive and discovering she was one of Thawne's ancestors, we cut to a big party with the whole Flash family celebrating their reunion. There's a sweet moment here where we see Barry having a tearful talk with his mom, or his mom's ghost, I guess. Barry ends up cutting his attendance at the party short when he gets a call about some danger and runs off as the issue and Williamson's run ends. I thought this finale was really pretty good. I thought it was a fairly unique way to take out Zoom that actually solves the whole never-ending death problem without, again, just killing him or shoving him into an alternate universe or some dumb bullshit. As I mentioned, it seems to imply that although he's now bound to the timeline changes and not immune to his own time travel shenanigans, he will at some point inevitably still become Zoom. Though saying this would be their final battle now, though, is just kind of silly, and I severely doubt that that's going to happen. I feel like that he's just going to come back again anyways. It feels to me that there was something done to set up the whole now cancelled 5G universe reset that they were planning, and now it's just going to kind of be left hanging in the balance, so who knows going forward. The reunion party is nice, and as mentioned, I really liked the part with Barry and his mom, although I won't lie, I thought they were going to reveal his mom was alive again now. Honestly, I'd be less mad if they did that rather than the whole ghost thing. I wasn't even mad at the ghost thing. I wouldn't even been mad if they did that. I'd be fine with it. But they didn't go that far, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your opinion. As a standalone issue, it's fairly flat. It's mostly just kind of an epilogue that wraps up the plot with a few minor plot threads here and there that it's left hanging by the end. The little party at the end is nice. I wish it went on for a little bit longer. It's basically just the one page. Everybody gets at least one line or two, but there really just isn't enough for me to enjoy it. Art-wise, it's a bit of a mess. Howard Porter is an artist I've liked in the past before, and while I don't think his art here is terrible, I think it's definitely sloppier than his usual output nowadays. A big thing that bothered me is that basically every page looks like it's been perspective shifted to the right in Photoshop, which makes the panel layouts really hard to follow, and the action just kind of looks wonky overall, and it's a little distracting. Overall, Williamson's final arc was pretty good in my opinion. I'm still a bit bummed at how Paradox ultimately got shafted after all the build-up he was given, but I think finishing it off with Zoom was a good idea. Williamson finally got what he wanted to bring the whole Flash family back. That was really great, I enjoyed that. And while Zoom's actual plan was basically nonsense and not really fully explained at all, I had fun with what I was given. Making Zoom responsible for all sorts of dumb nonsense was just the kind of ridiculous that I enjoy. His run has been very hit or miss overall. It's a lot, again, like I had said prior, a lot of people really liked his run, a lot of people really hated his run, but there's kind of an agreement that it's not perfect, there are problems with it, and I'm there too. There are definitely problems with his run overall, but I really enjoyed it overall, and I think it was a really, really solid run and really, really enjoyable for both new and longtime fans. I do think the ending was definitely a high point. He really went out on a really great note. But overall, the run was pretty inconsistent in terms of quality. There are definitely areas he could improve in, but I think he puts out pretty solid work overall. I just think there are some areas that he's not great in. I highly recommend his run. Maybe not the best for people who aren't already familiar with the characters, but it's definitely not bad as a beginner run. There are definitely a lot of points where he really does explain a lot of the old continuity and lore and stuff like that, so it's not a terrible choice for a beginner, but it's probably not the best choice. And with that, we move into the next issue, the first issue with our new writer, Kevin Shinick. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with his work, either in or out of comics. Honestly, I couldn't really find out anything that he had written or has otherwise been in, other than being the host of Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego. So other than that, I couldn't really tell you what exactly he's done that I could say that I've actually looked at. But he does actually really impress me in his first issue, and I really enjoyed it. The issue itself is primarily standalone. It features Flash going up against the Trickster, who's stolen Barry's ring and forces him into all sorts of life and death shenanigans to get it back. I really like how Shinick writes Barry here. He definitely plays up his intelligence a little bit more, but he's not afraid to show him being goofy either. But he's not overly serious either. He does really take the theft of the costume ring personally, and he has absolutely no time for Trickster's shenanigans, even more so than usual. He's a nice blend of serious and comedic, and I think it really works well. Trickster, on the other hand, is weird here, where I enjoyed how he was written. I really liked a lot of his banter with the Flash. He's written and acts more like the other Trickster, the original Jesse, despite the fact that it's supposed to be the new Trickster, Axel. Personally, I think it's either a case of not being too familiar with the difference between the two, or that he wrote the issue with Jesse being Trickster initially and him swapped later on without really changing much else. I'm going to lean towards the latter personally, as there's a decent chunk of panels where they forgot to draw the robot arm Axel has. Granted, those are mostly zoomed out shots, so it might have just been to save time, so it could be either or. Which is not to say that I think it's a bad thing. Again, I really liked how he writes the Trickster here, but it's still a weird, confusing distinction. Either way, it's not super important, but just something I noticed. The bulk of the issue itself is pretty fun. Trickster's taken over a local arcade and has a bunch of games set up to fuck with Flash, running bets on the side to make money off the shenanigans. It's fun as well because Flash is more or less forced to put up with it, since technically speaking, Trickster isn't doing anything illegal and actually apparently legitimately owns the arcade, which gets Flash even more pissed at him. The various games we see are really fun. The one I like the most is near the end, where Trickster gets Flash into a weird VR illusion, where he goes chasing after holograms of a bunch of other trick-based villains. I also like how Barry ends up beating Trickster by outsmarting him, tricking him into activating the ring, which causes his spare costume to blast out into his face at Mach speed and knocking him out. The whole motive about the ring is alright, works as a nice standalone plot. I like that we're given a genuine reason for why Barry gets so upset over it being stolen. Although that it turns out to be another thing about my dead mom loses me just a little bit here. Which is not to say that I hate that as a reasoning, it's just it's starting to get old. They keep bringing it up, they keep using it, it's gotten tiring. Still, it serves as a nice motive, and it ties into the whole idea of the speedsters having like lightning rods to keep them from getting stuck in the Speed Force. And Barry's weird secrecy about its importance also serves as a nice motive for Trickster to have stolen it and putting Flash through all these shenanigans beyond just because evil. Like I said, for the most part, the issue is standalone, but the final 2 pages serve as a setup for the next issue, revealing the long-awaited return of Dr. Alchemy. Long-awaited by who? I don't know. Somebody, probably. Overall, definitely impressed with Shinick's first issue. I really rather enjoyed what he did. I appreciate that it was, for the most part, a standalone issue. I think that was a smart idea on his part, rather than trying to set up a complex story arc right out of the gate with a lot of really big plot holes. Well, plot holes would have been correct as well. A lot of big plot threads and big overarching myth arcs and stuff like that. Very good idea. His characterizations previously mentioned. His writing is overall pretty solid. Everybody has really believable reasons for why they're doing these things, and there isn't anything that feels like wasted space or padding. He definitely plays up the humor here a bit more, not just with Trickster, but just kind of in general. And humor not in like the sense of the usual like quippy shit you get with comic books nowadays, but more like actual attempts at jokes. And sure, not all of the jokes hit, but I mean, he doesn't keep it entirely, jokey, no serious moments at all. At the very least, I did get a decent chuckle out of a decent chunk of them. Again, I like the tone he sets here. It's not overly serious, but the plot is still treated legitimately. Nobody's doing dumb shit for no good reason. There's actual motives. I think overall it works. Hopefully he's able to keep that consistently. I'm not exactly sure how long he's going to be on the books as of yet, but I think I'm going to enjoy his run while he's on it. The artist for this issue, Clayton Henry, is pretty solid too. His line work is very clean and does a solid job with detailing. Comes off very expressive, and it's a nice middle ground between realistic and cartoony that fits with the tone of the issue. The coloring's a bit spotty, and sometimes the lighting makes Flash look way too shiny, but he didn't do the coloring, so he's not to blame for that. The only major gripe I have with his art is that everybody has these really thin cylindrical heads, and it looks super goofy. Flash just looks like a goddamn Tic Tac in most of the panels. I think it's like a stylistic choice, and I don't hate it, I just find it rather silly looking overall. This is a really, really solid first issue, and I definitely recommend it. Now is probably your best chance to get into the book if you haven't already. So, picking up where we left off in Rise of Ultraman, issue 2 focuses on Shin having a conversation with Ultraman as they prepare to merge together, while Kiki and Captain Muramatsu decide to investigate what the USP knows about Ultraman and the whole giant space cannon thing. We'll focus on the part with Shin first, since that's the longer of the two. The segment's really interesting as it's somewhat of a moral debate between him and Ultraman, with Ultraman explaining that they have to reconcile their differences before they merge. Ultraman comes off as very bitter and somewhat cynical here too, which isn't really a way they presented any Ultra beforehand. Considering he just got shot twice in an hour, I can't exactly blame him. We get some Shin's backstory where we see how he and Kiki first discovered the USP's existence after an incident where they were attacked by an Ouroboros at a young age, and they become obsessed with learning more about the kaiju after they were saved. Stuff like that. A nice simple way to do it, having them go full conspiracy nut is a neat way to take it. The roles of the Ultras and the kaiju get recontextualized here too. As mentioned in the previous issue, the kaijus aren't just aliens or ancient monsters that lived on the planet. Rather, they're beings from another dimension, formed from a mysterious energy source that's powered by and drawn to all the wickedness and darkness of people's minds, and yada yada yada. And that the Ultras reached a form of enlightenment that rendered them immune to the influence of kaiju, so they took up the role as spiritual mentors and act as guardian warriors to prevent what Ultraman describes as kaiju crises, essentially a death spiral of a world where kaiju overrun and wipe out the planet. I like the way this is presented, I like the way the Ultras are taken here, and while it's not too far off from what they're already like in canon, it's still different enough so that it's still unique. And it fits better with what they were going with, where the kaiju are more of a metaphorical, metaphysical thing. I enjoyed it. I also like how Ultraman's more cynical personality ties into it, as it considers humanity to already have been a lost cause, essentially, bringing up how the last Ultra who came to Earth, 7, had been murdered in cold blood by humans, which is interesting because Shin brings up how it was actually 7 who had killed Dan Moriboshi and not the other way around, and refuting Ultraman's claims that humanity is a lost cause since he claims that the USP has everything under control. Of course, Ultraman ends up proving him wrong anyways, as when he lists off everything a race would need to be able to consider themselves free of kaiju, basically fries Shin's brain. But Ultraman does ultimately concede that Shin at the very least shows promise in that regard. The other half with Kiki and Muramatsu is fun, but it's not super long. Kiki gets pissed off that the whole shoot first, never ask questions plan that they went with ended up backfiring and fucking up Shin. So she convinces Muramatsu to investigate what's been going on behind the scenes with the USP. Again, my issue is that they make it too obvious early on that the USP is untrustworthy and shady. And again, it's a bit too much here where we have them find the giant laser cannon. Oh look, a guy who's not even supposed to be anywhere near here is in a place I knew nothing about. And it's getting to be a bit much early on. I think Muramatsu turning on the USP to help Kiki happens a bit too quickly here too, based on how he came off in the previous issue. Him turning is fine, they at least set it up reasonably, but it comes off as a bit of a drastic shift here for me. Again, I think this is the problem with the issue count. I think if it was any more than the 5 issues that they got, I think there would have been more time to make it feel natural, but where they only had a limited issue count, I think they're just kind of trying to rush through the plot that they came up with. Again, he does have a reasonable motive for why he ends up turning, where he ends up feeling responsible for what happened to Shin because he's the one who ordered him to shoot and causing the whole problem to begin with. But overall, again, it's just it's too much too fast is the overall problem with the series so far. There's some fun action scenes where the USP finds them and starts chasing them down, trying to shoot them. Although it's really, again, too short. Kiki ends up bailing on Muramatsu and finding her way to Dr. Yamamoto, the creator of the big laser gun, who's already gearing up to rant about how the USP is evil. And the issue ends with Ultraman and Shin completing their merge, Ultraman having warned him earlier that, although under normal circumstances the merge would be no issue, Ultraman's injuries have jeopardized the process, leaving us to wonder what exactly is going to happen to the two. Overall, it's just kind of a fine issue. Ultraman and Shin's conversation is very interesting and touches on a lot of unique ideas, and I think that was really a major highlight of the issue, but the parts with Kiki and Muramatsu aren't long enough to keep me invested. Again, the art is really stellar. The segments with Ultraman and Shin, they're in like a weird mind void, so it allows for a lot of unique framing without having to worry about any kind of consistency with framing and stuff like that. As well, the ideas they came up with for the Ultras and the Kaiju were really interesting. I hope they expand on it a little bit more. I don't think they're going to get to expand on it too much, but I enjoyed what they got. In terms of the action, it's a bit sparse. Like I said, there's like 1 or 2 little bits of action there, but otherwise it's mostly just kind of the discussion between the two. And that's fine, but what little we got isn't enough to keep me interested, and I think that's a downside. One thing I thought was neat, though, was all the extra little Ultra cameos. Sadly, Seven doesn't show up other than like a quick panel near the end, even though they kind of promised he would. But we get cameos from Ace, Taro, and 80, too, which I was pretty surprised to see. Sadly, they just get quick action poses as well, but it's still fun to see them here. Sadly, though, the issue is way too short. We don't get either the Ultra Q segments or the little Kaiju Step segments in this one here. Hopefully next time we get them again, though. I really enjoyed them. Marvel's G.I. Joe comic has always been really fascinating to me. At its heart, a promotional tie-in book for a bunch of crappy action figures, it's incredibly influential and has a very rich history behind it, both in terms of the creation of the series, but the actual series itself. Not only is it responsible for a sizable chunk of the lore and thematic elements of the franchise, it's one of those rare licensed books that ascends beyond the product or the franchise it's shilling and becomes this absolute behemoth in its own right. And yet, barely anybody really talks about the series, at least not too much anymore. Sure, I've seen it come up occasionally, but nobody really talks about it as much as, say, the cartoons or really any other entry of the franchise. I've always wanted to read the series in full as well. I've picked up a few issues here and there over the years, but I've never really bothered to check it out before now. So doing this series, I decided, well, this is one of the big ones that I've always wanted to tackle, so I decided to finally check it out. So, bit of context behind this series for the few of you not already aware of what the hell G.I. Joe is. G.I. Joe began as a series of action figures in the 60s produced by Hasbro based on generic US soldier archetypes. In the 1980s, Hasbro decided to relaunch the series, rebranding it as an even more generic but still obviously American group against still generic evil terrorists. Hasbro, to capitalize on the new series, launched a wide variety of multimedia tie-in series to act as both easy advertising and a way to get the kiddies hooked on the product before even buying.
Which was the style at the time.
Hasbro handed the series to Marvel, who handed writing duties to absolute legend Larry Hama, using his own military background to assist in crafting the characters, setting, and concepts, many of which are still used to this day. He also totally ripped off a bunch of things that Marvel already had, but that's neither here nor there. So I'm not going to do it issue by issue, quite frankly. I don't have time to do that, and I'm not that insane. So I'm going to tackle the series in chunks from time to time, discuss major events that go on, focus on maybe a single issue or two from the chunks that I decide to read. Naturally, of course, the comic focuses on the G.I. Joe team, formerly known as Special Counter-Terrorist Unit Delta, a secret military strike force sent in to handle missions of the utmost danger and importance. Based in The Pit, a secret underground bunker located beneath the real-life Fort Wadsworth, an army base and chaplain school located in Staten Island. Joes are sent out to deal with all variety of international incidents and terrorist plots, primarily battling against Cobra, a secret organization plotting to conquer the world, led by the enigmatic Cobra Commander and his second-in-command / girlfriend, the Baroness. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a huge fan of G.I. Joe. I'm relatively familiar with the series. I've watched reruns of the 80s show a lot as a kid. Of course, there have been some of the newer shows that I thought were pretty good, but the stark differences between the comic and really any other entry are pretty evident right out of the gate. For starters, it is way more violent. The shows, both the old ones and even the new ones more so, they're what one might call family-friendly violence. In that, sure, dudes are being shot at and there's explosions and everything like that, but nobody's really using real guns. They have all got, like, laser beams, and it's all, like, safety, stun crap, and nobody ever gets hit. Nobody actually ever dies. Oh, look, there's a parachute. See, everybody goes home happy and laughing. You know, it's consequence-free violence. The comic, on the other hand, doesn't shy away from having both sides using actual guns and bombs and rocket launchers and tanks and shit like that. People die, or there's actual consequences to somebody getting hurt, stuff like that happening. As well, the G.I. Joe team actually act like a realistic military team, operating with actual strategies and tactics, planning out their attacks and their operations. Unlike the show, where they basically have one strategy, which is guns blazing. And this carries over to the designs too, where with the exception of Scarlet and Snake Eyes, the Joes all have a unified dress code. Granted, there's some minor variations here and there to keep them from all looking identical, and making them actually look like a unified military organization and not some kind of government-sponsored village people. This also carries over to Cobra here as well, where they come off as a legitimate threat and actually terrifying and evil, and not just some bumbling, walking punchline Saturday morning cartoon villain. Hama brings his own military experience to the comic, and it really makes the book stand out, and makes her a really rather unique read. Our first batch of Joes aren't particularly interesting, and not yet at least. They all have quirks and stuff that make them stand out, but ultimately they're just kind of one note, and I have trouble telling them apart a lot of the time. I think the primary issue is that there's just so many introduced all at once, nobody really gets any room to stand out. And with the exception of Snake Eyes, naturally, who I think everybody figured was the most popular pretty much right off the bat, since he gets the most development and standalone scenes out of everybody else in the first 15 issues. Which is not to say I dislike any of the characters, they just haven't given me enough to be able to distinguish them from one another yet beyond superficial traits at all. Hell, if they didn't even say their names all the time, I'd forget who half of them even are. Cobra as a whole has this issue to a degree as well, since it's still so early. I don't think Hama has exactly figured out what flavor of terrorist whack job they represent yet, and a couple issues where they're hard left communists, and then there's others where they're far right fascist madmen, and they just keep flip-flopping here and there, and it gets a little confusing, and they do settle more on full far right fascists more later on, I know that, but early on, they don't really have a consistent flavor of what kind of brand of evil they are, so it comes off a little weird sometimes. Naturally, of course, Cobra Commander steals the spotlight rather quickly, presented less as a shrieking, psychotic man-child that we all know and love, and instead he's a cruel and ruthless warlord who's constantly plotting 2 steps ahead of everybody, has absolutely zero tolerance for bullshit, and is just absolutely despicable 100%. Granted, it is absolutely impossible to not read his dialogue in the Chris Latta voice, no matter how much you try not to, and no matter how much Hama insists otherwise. Now, the first 10 issues are largely standalone stories featuring the Joes going up against various different threats. A majority of the stories do obviously feature Cobra, but a few don't, and while they're not crazy exciting stories, it is still neat to see them going up against people who aren't just Cobra. It's some nice diversity with the plot lines there, and it leads them to coming off again more as an actual military organization who are just being sent out to deal with threats, and rather than we're the good guys stopping the bad guys, basically, and it's less like cartoonish. The cast at the start is already rather hefty, as I mentioned, with the G.I. Joe team already totaling at 13 different members, although other than generic goons, the only villains we have are Cobra Commander and Baroness. The issues feature the Joes in a variety of different situations, such as protecting a foreign diplomat, taking out a fringe doomsday militia, stopping Cobra from blowing up space shuttle, and stuff like that. It's all relatively down-to-earth, well, comparatively comparing to cartoon, which is destroying the dollar bill and replacing money with pictures of Cobra Commander, or carving my face into the moon, at least not yet anyways. Again, I think it's really interesting, and it's a very different flavor the franchise takes. They do start introducing characters and concepts that become more important later on. Issue 2 has a character named Quinn, who's an Inuit mercenary with a strict code of conduct and honor, and he's basically a rival to Snake Eyes, more or less, pretty early on, and he starts showing up a little bit later, and they really do build up the whole rivalry with them. Issues 6 and 7 feature a group called the October Guard, which are basically the Soviet equivalent of G.I. Joe, who show up to fight the Joes before briefly teaming up with them to fight Cobra. And then there's issue 10, which features the first appearance of Springfield, a painfully generic suburban town which secretly houses Cobra's secret headquarters. This issue 1 is a really fun one, as we have Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and Zap captured and brought there by Cobra, forcing them to fight their way out through the brainwashed civilians. We also get our first glimpse of Snake Eyes' backstory here too, showcasing all sorts of fun trauma like him getting his face blown off and other such moments. So, issue 11 technically starts an ongoing storyline, although the issue itself is primarily standalone. We also get introduced to 3 new Joes immediately, Gung-Ho, Doc, and Snowjob. I like Gung-Ho a lot pretty much immediately in this series, and he starts becoming really fun, although that's mostly because he's completely insane. As well, we get our first appearance of everybody's favorite Titanium Scotsman, Destro, who strangely is never named or shown on panel for the entirety of his first issue. Destro comes in with a decent amount of development early on too, establishing his prior relationship with the Baroness, beginning his petty rivalry and backstabbing contest with Cobra Commander over her. The storyline picks up in full in issue 12, with the Joes uncovering a secret plot from Cobra involving a deadly virus that they're going to unleash on the country, uncovering clues about it during an otherwise unrelated operation, leading them to uncovering one of Cobra's bases and storing it. The story here splits in two, as we have the bulk of the Joes focusing on the fight against the Cobra and trying to stop the virus. And then we have Snake Eyes, Quinn, and a Cobra scientist named Dr. Venom who showed up earlier, being left for dead because of one of Venom's own traps, ironically, leading them to a series of shenanigans. Destro's first full appearance comes in here, where he's immediately scheming against Cobra Commander by having one of his lackeys fuck with a trap involving fake info to lead the Joes away from the real secret Cobra base where the virus is being tested at, giving them the actual location of the base. Ironically, even if he didn't fuck with it, the plan would have backfired anyways. The place that Cobra tried to lure G.I. Joe to was their own secret base. The A-plot with the main force of the Joes kind of changes locations for here and there, starting with them raiding a Cobra base to leading to them raiding Cobra's secret virus testing facility in Springfield, which is not the same Springfield we were at in the previous issue, which is just a completely different one that they happen to be at. Whatever, I don't entirely know why, but I guess they didn't want to uncover their secret base early on anyways. And then the other half of the issue with Venom, Quinn, Snake Eyes is really fun, as it's them getting into a lot of shenanigans, and starting with them stealing a plane from a local militia in an airstrip, and them ultimately crashing in, I think it was like Miami or something they crash in. I think it's fun. Venom's almost predictable need to backstab everyone starts to get old after a while. Ultimately, the plot is a lot of different strings, and I'll leave it off at the end of issue 15 with Quinn and Snake Eyes getting arrested as Cobra sets their scheme into motion. Overall, the plot is really fun. Like I said, it starts going a lot of different places. I can definitely see how this series got so popular. It's very entertaining, and I've heard it only gets better from here, and I've read a couple of later issues, and I can definitely agree with that. It's very interesting seeing all these concepts in pop culture iconography in their earliest forms, and seeing how it'll evolve into what we know them as nowadays. I think the early issues do have some problems, again, with balancing the cast a bit. Hopefully that gets better later on, since it's safe to assume that there's going to be even more characters coming in later. The art overall, there's really nothing to write home about. It's just overall kind of generic, not really worth calling out at this point in time. Again, it goes into that problem I always describe of that generic 80s style, where everything just kind of looks the same. There's nothing that really stands out, and there's a couple of artists that stand out, but at the moment it's just kind of basic. Anyways, we'll pick this up again sometime soon, and we'll see where it goes from there. As for me, I think that's about everything for this time. Thank you again very much for watching, and join me next time when we talk about what else I've been reading.